Another thing to consider, though, is perspective on others. And this is where the tagline from my book comes in, beyond personality problems. Because so often what looks like a personality problem is actually a systems problem. And when we unpack difficult behavior, what we see below the surface are some triggers that are pushing our buttons. And what we need to be able to do is to have a series of maps of human behavior so we can understand what the triggers are for that behavior. So we stop labeling people as a jerk or difficult or whatever. It's their behavior that is difficult. It is the behavior that is jerk-like. All of us are humans, and all of us want to bring our best selves to work. So what is it that causes us to be less best version of ourselves? And a couple of the causes are survival mechanisms. And there's been a lot of work in the neuroscientist world to look at what are the triggers that cause people to go into an amygdala hijack, which is when we go into survival mode, we get tunnel vision and we either fight it out or we run away or we just hide under our desk. Now, it often doesn't show up like that in very graphic or extensive behaviors, but there's subtle variations of that. And a couple of the key triggers that you need to keep in mind to understand what is the difficult behavior that you're seeing are these. It comes down to fear of loss. Humans don't like to lose anything. Even if they're not attached to it, they will fight tooth and nail not to lose something. So, you might have a $10 mug and you might not be that attached to it, whatever. But if someone wants to take it away from you, it's like, hang on a second, I want that. It happened to me just recently. I was going to give away all these clothes to charity, and my friend said, oh, I'll have a look at that. All of a sudden, I'm looking at all these different pieces of clothing, like, I actually quite like that. I'm like, what am I doing? I had no problem giving it away to an anonymous person, but if someone was going to get something else that I had, I was going to lose out. Triggered. So fear of loss is the primary thing. The other thing to consider is what kinds of losses. And when it comes to difficult human behavior, there are a few. There's loss of power and autonomy. So if ever you've had a decision made to you, you can feel this, right? It's like, no one consulted me. This is being done to me, and this can push our buttons. That's the first trigger. Loss of place is another one. And what that means is place is about status and fairness. Now, each of us have different levels of triggers around some of these. Some of us, fairness is like, woo, sends us off our tree into argumentative or emotional behavior. So fairness and status are all about how we fit within the organization. And if you've ever had a job change where you lose your title, you go from director to manager, that can help us feel insulted or deflated. Or even in a meeting, if someone doesn't take your expertise and experience into account and just bypasses your suggestions, who's ever been triggered by that? That is loss of place. Okay, and the third one is loss of belonging, that sense of where do I fit within this particular team? And that goes right to the heart of who we are as humans. It's how we survived for millennia, is being part of a unit. So if we feel ostracized or left out, this can have a really emotionally turbulent effect on us. And we can shut down, or we can become like an emotional vampire where we kind of just squeeze through the corridors with this vapor across us of yuckiness. And that's quite difficult to deal with. I call that the water bomber, by the way, because if you come in with a mood, you kind of mess up all over people, leaving a huge wake behind you. And the third or the fourth trigger is loss of performance. All of us want to do a good job. And so if we get work piled on top of us, or something changes in the workplace, like COVID, then all of a sudden we have to do things differently and it affects our ability to perform. This can send us into a tailspin. And some of the behaviors that can come out of that, if we don't feel like we're able to speak up for ourselves, are things like undermining, white anting, and back corridoring. I think that's a verb. In any case, those kinds of bad behaviors or difficult behaviors are triggered by one of those losses, or a combination of losses. So when we know the patterns, we can manage the people. So instead of labeling people as difficult, we can look at what's triggering the difficult behavior, and that gives us an opportunity to address the causal issues below the surface.